You've met them before. You just couldn't figure them out. They sit in meetings while others scramble for approval. They listen while everyone else performs. They stay calm when chaos would benefit whoever caused it. And no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to find their buttons. It's not arrogance. It's not coldness. It's something deeper, something most people never develop. There are people walking among us who simply cannot be manipulated, not because they're smarter than everyone else, not because they've read more books or attended more seminars, but because something inside them operates differently. Their psychology is structured in a way that makes manipulation slide off like water on stone. And here's what's fascinating. They're rarely the loudest in the room. They don't announce their strength. They don't need to, because real psychological immunity doesn't perform. It simply exists. Most people will never understand what makes these individuals different, but today you will, because once you see the architecture of an unmanipulable mind, you can never unsee it. And more importantly, you can start building it yourself. Every manipulation begins the same way. It looks for a wound. The manipulator searches for insecurity, for unmet needs, for the desperate hunger that drives human behavior. They look for the person who needs to be liked, the person who fears rejection, the person whose identity depends on external validation. That's the entry point. That's the door. But some people don't have that door. It's not that they've never been hurt. It's that they've done something most people avoid their entire lives. They've faced their wounds directly. They've sat in their pain long enough to understand it, and in that understanding, they neutralized its power. The person who cannot be manipulated has already asked themselves the hard questions. What am I afraid of? What do I need from others that I should be giving myself? Where does my self-worth actually come from? They've answered honestly, and those answers became armor. The manipulator shows up with tools designed for desperation, but there's no desperation to hook. They offer validation, but their target already validates themselves. They threaten rejection, but their target has already accepted the possibility of being disliked. They promise belonging, but their target already belongs to themselves. That's the first psychological layer, emotional self-sufficiency. Not isolation, not coldness, just a quiet, unshakable sense that their worth isn't up for negotiation. Here's what separates the unmanipulable from everyone else. They see sequences, not moments. Most people experience life as a series of isolated events. Someone gives them a compliment, they feel good. Someone criticizes them, they feel bad. Someone offers help, they feel grateful. Each interaction exists alone, disconnected from what came before. But the person who cannot be manipulated sees the thread. They notice when compliments come right before requests. They notice when vulnerability is performed rather than felt. They notice when someone's words don't match their patterns. And they notice when they're being tested. This isn't paranoia, it's awareness. They've trained themselves to observe human behavior like a language. And once you become fluent, manipulation becomes obvious. It has a rhythm, a structure, a predictable sequence of setup, hook, and extraction. The unmanipulable mind catches these patterns early, not after the damage is done, not in hindsight, but in the moment while it's happening. They feel the subtle shift in energy when someone moves from genuine connection to strategic influence, and they adjust accordingly. They don't announce their awareness. They don't accuse. They simply stop playing. They give less information. They commit to nothing. They watch. And the manipulator, sensing resistance they can't explain, eventually moves on to easier targets. Manipulation thrives on reaction. It depends on speed. The manipulator creates urgency because urgency bypasses logic. They need you to feel before you think. They need you to respond before you reflect. They need your emotions online and your reasoning offline. But the unmanipulable mind has mastered something deceptively simple: the pause. When pressure arrives, they don't react. They wait, not from hesitation, from strategy. That pause is where manipulation goes to die. Because in that space between stimulus and response, clarity lives. They've trained themselves to notice when they're being rushed, and that noticing triggers a slowdown instead of a speed up. The more someone pushes for an immediate answer, the longer they take. The more emotional the appeal, the more logical they become. The more urgent the demand, the more still they grow. This isn't natural for most people. Our biology wires us for quick reactions. But the unmanipulable mind has rewired itself. It has learned that speed serves the manipulator, not the target. So it refuses to be hurried. In conversations, this shows up as thoughtful silence. In negotiations, it shows up as patience that unnerves the other side. In relationships, it shows up as a refusal to make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. That pause isn't empty. It's full of observation, calculation, and self-consultation. And when they finally respond, it comes from choice, not compulsion. Most people think of boundaries as walls you build when someone hurts you, a reaction, a defense mechanism, something that shows up after the damage. The unmanipulable mind sees boundaries differently. They're not walls, they're architecture, the structure that holds up their entire life. These boundaries exist before any threat arrives. They're not reactive, they're foundational. The person knows what they will and won't accept, not because someone tested them, but because they decided in advance. This changes everything. When you wait until manipulation is happening to figure out your limits, you've already lost ground. You're negotiating under pressure. You're building the plane while flying it. But when your limits are pre-established, manipulation meets immediate resistance. The boundary isn't up for discussion because the discussion happened long ago, internally, privately, conclusively. This is why unmanipulable people seem to respond so quickly to violations. It's not that they're reactive. It's that the decision was made years before. They're simply executing a policy they already created, and manipulators sense this. They probe for flexibility. They look for the place where limits bend. But when they push against someone whose boundaries are architectural rather than emotional, they find no movement, no negotiation, just structure. This one surprises people, because who doesn't like being complimented? But the unmanipulable mind has a complicated relationship with flattery. Not because they're immune to feeling good, but because they've learned that excessive praise is often the setup for something else. They ask themselves questions most people don't think to ask. Why is this person telling me this? What's the context? Does this match their pattern of behavior? Is this observation or strategy? It's not cynicism, it's discernment. They've noticed that genuine appreciation usually comes without agenda. It doesn't need anything back. It doesn't arrive right before a request. It doesn't feel like a transaction. But strategic flattery has a different texture. It's slightly too enthusiastic, slightly too specific to the thing the manipulator wants, slightly too well-timed. The unmanipulable person feels the difference, even when they can't articulate it, and instead of letting the praise inflate them, they stay neutral. They thank the person without opening up. They acknowledge the compliment without becoming vulnerable to the ask that follows. This doesn't mean they reject all praise. It means they evaluate it. And that evaluation prevents the manipulator's first move from landing. Here's the psychological foundation beneath everything else: the willingness to be uncomfortable. Manipulation works because most people will do almost anything to avoid negative feelings. They'll agree to things they don't want. They'll abandon their positions. They'll betray their own interests, all to escape the discomfort of conflict, disapproval, or tension. The unmanipulable mind has made peace with discomfort. They've learned that saying no feels awkward but rarely causes real harm. They've learned that disappointing someone is survivable. They've learned that sitting in tension without rushing to resolve it is a skill, not a flaw. This comfort with discomfort removes the manipulator's primary tool. They can't threaten you with feelings you've already accepted. They can't use awkwardness as a weapon against someone who doesn't mind being awkward. The person who cannot be manipulated has stopped requiring every interaction to feel pleasant. They've stopped needing closure. They've stopped demanding that others like them in every moment. And paradoxically, this makes them more respected, because people can sense when someone won't abandon themselves to avoid temporary discomfort. That's called integrity. And integrity has a gravity that manipulation can never match. You're not born unmanipulable. You become it. Every person who now carries this psychological immunity was once vulnerable. They were once hooked by the same tactics they now see through. They once gave away their power to people who didn't deserve it. The difference is what they did with that experience. They didn't just survive the manipulation. They studied it. They asked themselves how it worked. They identified their own weaknesses that made them susceptible. And then they rebuilt. This rebuilding isn't about becoming hard. It's about becoming whole. It's about filling the voids that manipulators exploit, developing the awareness that manipulation requires darkness to operate in, creating the internal stability that makes external control unnecessary. The person who cannot be manipulated hasn't escaped their humanity. They've just stopped outsourcing their needs, stopped abandoning their own judgment, and stopped requiring others to make them feel worthy. That's not cold, that's complete. The unmanipulable mind doesn't advertise itself. It doesn't need to prove its strength. It doesn't argue about its boundaries. It doesn't explain its awareness. It simply operates according to its own internal code. And that code is non-negotiable. In a world that profits from your insecurity, these individuals are quietly revolutionary. They opt out of the game without announcing their departure. They refuse to trade their peace for anyone's approval. And they hold a kind of power that can't be taken because it was never given by others in the first place. This is the psychology of the unmanipulable. Not superior, not paranoid, not isolated, just awake. They've learned that the greatest protection isn't vigilance against others. It's the relationship you build with yourself. Because when you stop abandoning yourself, no one else can lead you astray. And here's the truth. That changes everything. You can become this person, not by reading one script or learning one technique, but by doing the slow, uncomfortable work of knowing yourself completely. Because in the end, manipulation only works on strangers, and the person who cannot be manipulated has stopped being a stranger to themselves.